All right, good to be back with you here on Monday. Looking forward to this next opportunity, but certainly you do want to address Saturday. Much like I talked about post game. A lot of credit goes to Oregon certainly, but I think there was shortcomings on our end that allowed that game to get lopsided too quickly. Our inability to run the ball, establish any kind of run game, stay on the field on third down offensively, defensively, just not disrupt them enough to get them off the field. And then special teams, we didn't flip the field over. And, in particular the sequence where we had a good punt, we had flipped the field over, we get a penalty, we come back and get the punt blocked. That was a 71-yard change in field position just in that sequence, and the game was 14-0 at that point. So a lot of things to learn from in that game. I thought our guys, stayed in the fight, I suppose. Kept going after it. And that's something to build off of. But by and large, it's a game where we didn't ultimately do the things that we'd hoped we could do, and it was going to be a real hard task anyways. So then you do a few things that are within your control to allow them, to make plays, get field position, etc. It made for a long day. I know it was the first opportunity for a lot of our guys to be in new roles, and that experience will suit them well. It's in some ways it's better to be tested like that right out the gate than to have this missed sense of where you're at by playing a team that isn't quite the quality of Oregon. So we gotta utilize what we saw in that film. It's not just what happens on a Saturday, it's what happens every day in practice that I know we can continue to improve upon. Just pure fundamentals. Against a team like Oregon, you slip in your fundamentals, whether that's pad level or leverage, it's gonna be really hard anyways, and then you do that, it makes it that much harder. But ultimately, I do think our guys grew out of that day, and we obviously look forward to this next opportunity to come back home and play another excellent opponent in South Dakota State. We certainly have history over the last 4 years playing them 3 times. Once here back in 21, the semifinals, twice over there in Brookings. They've been at the top, beyond obvious, being a 2-time champion, 2-time semifinalist just in these last 4 years alone. They've had plenty of turnover this past year with Coach Rogers leaving and Coach Jackson coming in, players leaving to some extent, but they returned a lot of guys too at the same time that have been in that program. And Coach Jackson having been there, Coach Eisness on the offensive side, Coach Bergstrom on the defensive side having been there, even though they had as much change as they did, I do feel like there's plenty of continuity just with how they've done things, how they've positioned this program to be where it's at, and that's a perennial championship contender. I know offensively, you have one game to look at now versus taking this big huge snapshot of last season. It'd be important that we corral Chase Mason. Chase is a senior, has been in that program. This is his first opportunity to be the guy. I remember him back from the recruiting days when I was at Wyoming recruiting. He went to play baseball initially at Nebraska. He's come back to South Dakota State and commend him for staying there as a backup to Gronowski those couple of years. Last year he was a guy that was on the field plenty, rushed 46 times for over 460 yards. On Saturday against Sac State, he threw about the amount that he threw last year though, and he was impressive. He was 17-23, just about 200 yards passing, good command. His athleticism certainly showed up in being able to get out and run at times. So first and foremost, he's going to have to be a guy that we corral because he is a dual threat. Julius Loffridge, transfer from Fordham, he's an impressive running back. They've had impressive running backs, all these years, and he's a bigger version maybe of what they've had. Was real successful the first day out. His Fordham days, he rushed for over 3,000 yards. Rushed for over 150 the other night, and it's a mixture. He can certainly go inside, outside. So those two guys offensively are the guys that you point to. I know receiving wise, it's a receiving core that's I think developing. I think they have some athleticism there. So to look at one game and say it's this guy is going to be the guy, I think they've just been able to really do it with a really solid group over the years, a talented group, and it appears they have that once again. Offensive line wise, turnover there too for them, but their two returning starters. There's 2 tackles, and both those guys are really good players, Christensen and Hagen. Flipping over to defense, I was really impressed with how they played against Sac State, and that's more a compliment to South Dakota State than it is anything else. Whatever the expectations for Sacramento State were, South Dakota State squashed those in a hurry. They held the running game down to almost nothing, and in a game where the score didn't really get away from Sac State, they took the run game away, and ultimately Sac State didn't get to 200 yards. I think they were 2.6 yards per play, put just 3 points up. So awfully impressive performance on defense. With a bunch of new starters, but a lot of guys that have played for them. You look at their front, one returning starter, but all those guys have played a bunch. They've been really good about playing a ton of guys in their front, and that experience shows when you get one returning starter, but all those guys are really capable. I thought their linebackers and safeties filled really well, tackled really well, and that's been the story when we've played them really, each of the last 3 times. And then their corners have good length and can cover out there, so they can be that aggressive style of defense that they've been and not look that much different, even though they've had the coaching change they've had. In bringing Coach Jackson back, a lot of history there. I know we saw Coach Jackson last year as Idaho's, or last 2 years, I guess, or last year as defensive coordinator for Idaho. I think it was just last year. And then Coach Bergstrom, he was the coordinator back in 21 when we saw them. I know Coach Eisnes on the offensive side, it goes back a little further, but a lot of history there too. So, really experienced staff. They're going to be well coached, and it's a lot of respect for what they're going to be capable of, and really looking for the opportunity to play at home. Gold Rush is always a scene. It's an event, and beyond that, this is going to be a tremendous game. So excited about that, and with that, I'll open up for questions.
How much do you think a game like this can kind of set the tone for the rest of the season, if at all?
Well, it's the next one up, and one game against Oregon wasn't going to make us no different than if we play well in this game. That's not going to guarantee anything, but it's got we got to right the ship, I think, for sure. And no better opportunity than to be back home and to be playing against a really good opponent to really sort out who we are. It's our hope that that performance at Oregon is not who we are. Regardless of how well Oregon's going to do, we need to be better than that. So that's the charge this weekend. We got to play better and set the tone, right the ship, whatever you want to say.
What the inability to run on Saturday? How much is that due to their front or other factors?
Oh, I think it probably starts with their front, but our ability to not allow penetration is in some case our ability to not allow that to happen. It's getting off on the ball in a loud environment. It's being able to communicate. It's being able to see what's in front of you, and make those really quick determinations against really quick players, not just big players, quick players. So I think it goes both ways. It wasn't gonna be easy by any means. It was gonna be a real challenge to run the ball against them. But I look back at the film, in that first stretch, I'd say first 3-4 possessions, that needed to look differently than it was. We get into short yardage, after we had moved the ball a little bit, and we go 3 consecutive plays and don't pick that up on the ground, and that to me is just as much on us as on them. So I think a really good learning experience. We did have, the whole group playing either their first game or in a position they hadn't played, and we practiced that way really all week though. So that's not an excuse, but it's hopefully to say, okay, because it was that first opportunity against a really good opponent, can we take that, learn from it, and be much better the second time around?
How'd you feel like Braden Zimmer did in his first start?
I thought Braden did all right. Yeah, we left camp thinking Braden could be a starter. Likely wouldn't have been, but he held his own out there. There was a few plays where his size and just understanding what he's got to do at a little bit lighter weight means, but he's got long levers too that make it hard for those going against him. So I was pleased with that. I don't think the opportunity environment was too big for him.
And then similarly, I guess anything stood up from Justin's play?
Yeah, I thought Justin Lamson played a really solid game for the first time out. He wasn't perfect, but he made quick decisions by and large. I know we took a couple sacks that I think in hindsight he just gets rid of the ball instead of trying to maybe extend it. I know one was even a screen, but by and large made quick decisions, threw the ball accurately for the most part. I thought more than anything, it became clear that Justin, in that environment can lead us. Not that I didn't expect that, but it becomes clear there. And again, I talked about his competitive nature. I think that was really evident all the way down to the end. And our ability to score there didn't mean much in the grand scheme of things, but it did mean something. I think that we could cap it off, we could finish a drive, and I think we can carry that forward. So really pleased with Justin. I know he's just going to keep getting better as his comfort level and his experience within our offense continues to pile up.
His connection with Taco was front and center, I guess. A couple days removed from the game. What can you kind of say about that and building off of it?
Yeah, I think the play calls, the ball just found Taco, and that's going to be something that I think we'll see over and over again. I don't love that half of our catches, I guess, were Tacos. I think we have to be able to distribute that, but it's just the way that kind of went. And but Taco's going to be positioned to catch the football, and we got to get some other guys positioned probably to get a few more targets at the same time. But Taco's a guy that we can rely upon, get the ball in his hands, and he's going to be able to do some things. So not that he won't be our leading ball catcher by any means, but that distribution hopefully at least works itself out to be a little bit more spread out among some other guys. But Taco's a guy that stage wasn't too big for, and that was evident. And pleased with that because that's a jump. I caught as many balls in that game as anybody here in a long time. We talked about that, but it was a third of his catches from last year in one game. So we'll keep feeding him the ball, and we got to find ways to feed other guys the ball at the same time.
Saturday you talked a lot about just the experience gain, especially in the secondary. I guess watching the film, anything that stood out from that group?
Well, some good and bad. I think a group of guys that generally was positioned well. The ball didn't get behind us except for the one time, and we were in zone coverage on that one, and that was a coverage bust more than was a guy getting beat, which is neither. Doesn't make it excusable by any means, but as far as those guys being able to keep the ball in front of them, make good decisions, that part was good. Now, some guys good, sometimes good tackling, sometimes poor tackling. And with those guys that are not as big in stature, they're gonna have to figure that part out. Our ability to take on Sadiq, that was not the way that should have looked. We couldn't go and just try to bear hug Sadiq. He was gonna break that tackle every day against anybody if we went that way. I know we missed a couple others on the perimeter, but then we made some too. So, the growth of that group of corners, there's 3 freshmen and there's Takari Carr who hasn't played much, needs to happen at a pretty quick rate, and that was a tall task that first game out, and again it was some good, some bad, and we need to grow out of it.
Any injury update? I know Neil and Taki are still listed as starters.
Yeah, so that indicates no real update, and that's just being completely honest. It's Labor Day today, and we don't practice till later today. Not that they haven't been in and been checked on, but to have any kind of final word, we're not there yet. And what that means for this week, we'll as probably these next 2 days go on, and then ultimately, try to be as healthy as we can, going into this game. But those two obviously missed a chunk of that game, and did force some other guys to get some action, and that's just the way a season will play out, and our team needs to be built for that. So we will see on those two. Otherwise, I talked a little bit about Burke. He'll be out there today, and we'll see where we can get with him as the week goes on.
You talked about the Gold Rush atmosphere, just the benefit of this game at home with a crowd like you guys have.
Well, anytime you can play in front of your own fans, there's a benefit, especially the environment that we do have here at Montana State. And what that means for our guys is something. It certainly is when you have a 22,000 plus stadium behind you, and then also what it can mean for your opponent too. And going into Autzen, I think we handle that okay, but it definitely has an effect on you, and that's what we hope Bobcat Stadium does on South Dakota State. Anybody else that comes in here makes it hard for that offense to function the way it would at home. I guess that's the biggest thing. And then on the flip side, our offense doesn't have to deal with some of the things that we did last week. So it has to be a factor for us, and I know we can't wait to get out there on Saturday night.
With Dan Jackson facing his defense 2 times last year.
Yeah.
I know you overlapped at South Dakota State, but he wasn't in as big of a role then when you were at NDSU. But how much does that experience with him in the past help going into this one?
Yeah, I think you gotta, coming into this year, you gotta look and say, okay, what are they gonna be? This is Dan's first time becoming a head coach. Obviously, he hires 2 guys that have a lot of experience. Both have been head coaches, both have been coordinators, and you're trying to sort out what are they going to do. And then we got a game on top of that. So I think what they were doing at Idaho with Coach Eck was an extension of that experience at South Dakota State. What Coach Bergstrom was doing at his stop at Winona State, same thing. So it all kind of comes back to South Dakota State and what those guys were a part of with Coach Stiglmeyer as they became coordinators, and now they, all 3 of them, Coach Isons as well was a head coach for a stretch. So I think the experience, what I take from that is Coach Jackson knows us better than if he hadn't been at Idaho. Because he hadn't been at South Dakota State through these last 3 times we played them, but because he's played us on the other side at Idaho, I think he's got a good sense for who we are, certainly a good sense for the environment here in the stadium, and I know in how he structured his staff at the same time, it's evident that becoming a continuation of what South Dakota State has been is the primary deal, and I'm certain that's why he was the primary target when they made the hire. Is let's keep this thing going. It moved from Coach Stiglmeyer to Coach Rogers and didn't change a whole lot, and now it's moved to the next guy, even though Coach Rogers left with everybody essentially. How do we continue this on? Because it's been such an established program over a long period of time. Let's bring guys back that have been part of that. So I think going back to why his last year at Idaho against us, he knows our personnel inside and out, that played in those games. He knows this environment, and he's not certainly coming in this blind.
The previous games against South Dakota State, how motivated are you and the other guys who were there for those 2 losses, and then how much you draw on the 2021 win here?
Well, I think you're just motivated to compete against one of the best programs in the country, I think, period. And that game back in 23, we left a lot to be desired that day, but that's how ways go. You look out on that, offensively, not a lot of guys that played that day are playing for us. Defensively, a few more guys that were part of that game. So, and I think you look on their team, it's similar. So I think there's just a lot of respect. I think we understand fully the opportunity that's in front of us, and this won't make us or break us, but it'll set us in a different course than that first game did for sure for us. And ultimately these games matter a lot in the grand scheme of things. When the dust settles at the end of the season, that's a long ways down the road. But these opportunities to play a top flight team in the non-conference don't come about every weekend. So this is one for us, and we got to make the most of it.
Coach, how much of Justin not using his legs as much was the new scheme or being down early?
We didn't run a lot of offense. I know that. I think schematically he's capable for sure. I know it's going to be, not as much of what we do, but he's certainly capable. I think that's the case. We did quarterback run him a few times, and things collapsed on him pretty quickly, but he did gain some yards. And so I think he's definitely capable. I know our ability to throw the football in those run pass types of situations, it was a little more prominent than it maybe been with Tommy, less kind of run option type of stuff. So that's just one game. I know the score got away from us pretty quickly, and we were just trying to do everything we could to move the ball. So we'll see how that continues to play out, but he's definitely capable of running the football. To answer the question, I think first and foremost, and then how much we choose to run them, I think will be dictated in large part by what the defenses give us.
I know it's only one game, but anything that you could glean from South Dakota State's offense against Sac in terms of similarities or differences with Mason instead of Gronowski?
Yeah, I think you got to look at the whole piece. I think Gronowski, his experience obviously grew over time. We saw him the last 2 times we played him. He was a quarterback in the first time we played them. I think where are their weapons is what I think we've looked at before, and they've had really good skill. They have really good skill to go around Gronowski. I think those faces are new. I know in Loffridge they have a bona fide running back for sure. They've always had that. I think receiver wise, generally besides Goring, it's new faces. But I think they ultimately want to allow their quarterback to make plays in different ways. I think Chase has played one game as the starter. I think that's probably the difference compared to where they would have left off at Gronowski. He had so many starts under his belt. After we get to these last couple of years, so I'm guessing that building off of that is the biggest thing that they want to accelerate as fast as they can, because this is a one-shot deal with Mason as a senior this year. So I think and I think Coach Eisnes has his own stamp on it too. It's been a while since Eric's been at South Dakota State. The coordinators that followed him probably learned a lot from him. So there's some nuances to how he calls a game that I think are probably as critical for us to look at, as opposed to just comparing how different is Chase Mason from Mark Gronowski. If that makes sense.
Going back and watching the film, what were some of those things that you said that you can build off the most that you liked?
Well, I think it's taken that experience, while painful at times for some of those first time guys. I thought a bunch of those first time guys, they competed. And that's not just freshmen. That's like a guy like Cole Taylor getting thrown in and really playing regular linebacker for the first time. I thought Cole really went after it in that regard. Bryant Meredith got thrown out there a little sooner than we thought, and it wasn't perfect for Bryant, but I thought he ultimately competed. And we talked about Braden Zimmer on the offensive side, that experience he gained. Everett Carr, kind of same thing. Rocky Lencioni, wasn't perfect, but he certainly didn't back down. So I think it's those guys that need to come for us, getting that experience. Certainly Justin is a big piece to that too. He's an older guy, first time playing for us. So we need to grow, and that was going to be evident no matter who we played this first game. And you maybe get put to task a little bit more playing Oregon than anyone else, and that's okay. That's the way the schedule played out. So I'm excited about those guys being able to continue that growth. Okay, first game's behind you now. Where can you go from here? And you know, I still think we have a ways to go, but you know, that game 1 to game 2 improvements I always talked about. You know, and it's the biggest thing is you haven't played against anybody else in a long time, and you haven't probably played. You know, we tackle and we scrimmage here and there, but you don't play it out as a game. So there's nothing like how a game tests you, and you know, we need to be able to take another step forward going into this game.
Coulter, do you have anything?
Hi, Coach, can you hear me okay?
Gotcha.
South Dakota State, Montana State were the best in the FCS for the last however long, 5, 6, 7 years. So, why do you think that is? Why do you think both programs have been able to sort of maintain their level amongst the 3 or 4 best teams in the country for the last 5 or 6 years?
Well, I think we're positioned, the both of us, in places where people really care about FCS football, really support it. I think that in itself creates expectations, you know, which then in turn come along with resources that you should be able to, you know, live up to those expectations, I guess. I know for them, you know, their level of continuity going back to when I played, that's a long time ago. Coach Stiegelmeier was a head coach when I played, you know, so he was there forever. These guys that have coached under him, so many of them, and not just these last 2 head coaches, but so many of those coaches, the coordinators, the guys that played there, they've had this continuous program going back a long time. That's almost 30 years. To put that in context a little bit, that's a long time, and they've just continued to build, and I think through that build, especially the last 15 years, expectations have risen, but their resources have too, and how they see themselves as a program has changed dramatically. I'd say the last 15 years compared to maybe where it was 25 years ago when I first started coaching. And I like to think on our side of things, you know, our expectations, our resources, while we haven't had that same relative maybe coaching continuity, I think we've had plenty of continuity in different ways. And if that's even looking at, you know, our president being here for 15 years, our athletic director going on 10 years, I think that part matters. So, you know, I think it's, again, 2 places where football, FCS football matters. I think we've chose to do things the right way, and I think they have too, as far as just developing. And that's not easy, especially now in these days, at this day and age, to choose that route. But you look at their roster, a lot's made of how much they lost, and they brought some guys in, but it's the guys that have been in that program that stand out to me as I watch them. Not guys that have started necessarily, but have played, and now you're like, okay, where'd that guy come from? What number was he last year? You know, they have a bunch of those guys. You maybe assume they'd come from someplace else, but they've been in the program, and they're sophomores and juniors now. And that's the way we've chose to do it too. So I think there's something to that that's similar between the 2 programs as well.
Jimmy Rogers' defense looked a lot like Coach Stig's defense to me. I know it's only 1 game of sample size, but is Dan Jackson's defense similar to how much different are they defensively than maybe the last couple?
I would say 1 game it looked pretty similar. Sound, attack style, aggressive. Gonna make things hard on you running the football. It wasn't that Sac State didn't try, you know, and Dan was a defensive assistant. Berge was a defense assistant, was co-coordinator with Jimmy. Jimmy became head coach. He still has, you know, hands in the defense. So, you know, I really, you know, see this is South Dakota State's defense more than it is Dan's defense, Jimmy's defense. This is South Dakota State's defense, and it looked very similar.
You mentioned Mason, but he seems similar to Gronowski a little bit, but also way different in certain ways too. He's a great athlete, so I mean, how much does that put pressure on you guys defensively?
Yeah, I think more so than Mark. I think is you got to keep him corralled, and that's just one little sample size. You know, he only threw the ball 26 times last year, so really he wasn't really playing quarterback there. He was coming in and he rushed the ball 46 times, like I said, and was highly productive in that end of things. But you know, this is his first game playing quarterback, and you know, I'm sure Coach Eisnes is trying to play to his talents the best he can and make it his own, I guess. But he's a big, impressive looking dude. He can really sling it, and he's fast. They got him listed at 240. He's big and strong, and you know, I think what they can do in the run game with his physicality, I think is a little bit different than what they're able to do with Gronowski now. You know, the lengths at which they could go in the passing game with Gronowski's just experience, I think, was maybe a little bit different. But it's not that, you know, Chase Mason has the ability to throw it all over the yard. He can really sling it. And the ball gets out quick, and you know, so and again, I mentioned it before, it isn't just about Chase. It's about, okay, who are their playmakers around him? You know, you think about the experience that we saw back in that succession from 21 to 22, 23 in skill positions. They're just kind of starting over there for the most part, you know, with receivers and tight ends. Goring's played a bunch. I know that, but you know, those years it felt like they had 2-3 guys in that core, you know, returning with production every year. So it's a little bit of developing that group, I think, as much as how this is going to play exactly to Chase Mason's skill set.
You mentioned Cole Taylor and how well he played. I totally agree with you. I thought he played awesome. What does it take for a guy like that has great physical tools to sort of put it together, though, and you know, be able to recognize things within a flow of a game like that?
It's reps and reps and reps and reps and reps. Because Cole didn't play any defense in high school, so we knew it was going to maybe be a 2-year project. And I think enough so, like, out of last fall, we were okay. This spring, it either is going to work for Cole, or we might have to, you know, maybe put him at defensive end or something like that, because we got to get him on the field. He was a really good special teams player last year, and he needed to be able to take that step defensively. And I think spring ball, and having gone through spring ball for a second time, and you know, I think his confidence in how it's supposed to play out, you know, just built. And then he really had a fall camp on top of that spring that took that growth to another level. And now what a game can do for him, that's hard to quantify. You know, it is that step, though. It's all those lumps those guys take in practice and not doing things right, not seeing it consistently, and then it gets clicking so you can play faster. But then it's the game experience that, you know, takes that confidence to another level. So and Cole's not there, but boy, that was a huge step for him on Saturday.
He seemed like he recognized things so quickly, though. I mean, pretty quick trigger, and he also seemed like he's pretty fearless. Do you think that comes to him?
Yeah, I think that combination is all come together. He's really intelligent, knows the game, playing quarterback all those years, can be really aggressive, but what does that even look like? When should I pull my trigger, so to speak, on things? So that was a process. I think getting him from being a processor, a thinker out there, to being more of a natural reactor, I think has been this transition, different for him, having not played any defense, than maybe a guy that's played all this linebacker, you know, or whatever, coming up, played linebacker or safety. So maybe a lengthier curve here as these, you know, first couple years have gone for him. But the athleticism, the size, I mean, that's why we chose to do what we did and present that to him in recruiting, to become this linebacker. And I think right away he's like, "What are you talking about, Coach?" Well, we see it in you. You may not see it in yourself. It might take some time, but you work hard, you'll make that transition to get there. And that was a huge step for him, to, you know, continue to put it all together.
Also writing something about Caden Dowler this week, and Coach Al was talking about how they had a conversation of Dowler sort of staying in it as a leader even when he was out, and that seemed like it really kept him, you know, in with the team, and obviously paid off now being a captain this year. So can you just tell me about that element?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, just the example. I think it was perfectly clear to anybody on this team and this organization that Caden is doing everything he can to put himself back in position. And I even know that transition for Caden, you know, whatever it would have been, end of September last year, that is not easy. It wasn't the first time he'd been injured. Am I gonna go through this all again? And he flipped that switch pretty quickly. And maybe because he had been through it before, he knew he could get on the other side. But I think that example, you know, through last fall, and you know, I'm certain his connection with his twin brother and staying in those two are so close that's this natural draw for him back to the group, back to the, you know, the core of this team. But it's also, they're different personalities at the same time, and I think Caden, you know, in the off season in particular, you could tell made another jump just to get out in front a little bit more, you know, and that's what he is. I know coming out of West, I don't think any of this personality, this leadership would have surprised his coaches there. And unfortunately, there's just been, you know, the injury bumps in the road for him. And but his ability to persevere, his work habits, his no nonsense approach, but his also this ability to be this great teammate, is why a guy like him who hasn't played a ton is elected a captain.
He and Taco, you said they're so close. Some twins have like this crazy sibling rivalry. They seem like they are just one of the, sort of in lockstep. I mean, is that how it comes across to you guys as coaches too?
Yeah, but they're the first ones that want to get after each other too. So that probably, you know, that's like brothers are too. So yeah, I think they've had this unique ability to depend on one another. You know, and you think about how their careers have gone. Their injuries haven't overlapped, but they've both been injured. You know, so that level of support is one thing. But I think it's just on a day-to-day basis. I think they were brought in this world to support one another, and I think they would both agree with that.
Last thing, that Oregon team was so impressive, and so I mean, you're not going to see a guy like Sadiq again, or you know, I mean, a lot of guys don't. You know, that's probably the best you're going to see. But you're seeing a great team come on Saturday too. So how do you sort of use the we're never going to see a monster like this again, but we also have a really good team coming to Bozeman on Saturday?
Well, it's just that I think better have a high level of respect for what this team is capable of and who they are, and not try to even draw any lines. Just this team has guys that can play football. They have a committed championship mindset, unlike too many programs in this country. And you know, I think on top of that, they have this chip on their shoulder because you know they lost a lot. They lost their coach, the coaching staff, the whole group, a bunch of players, but this committed group stayed. They brought in coaches who knew the program. So expect nothing less than this team is going to, you know, be hard to handle. And you know, I think flipping on that film of theirs from Saturday night, I think you can see that. So it's not like our guys are gonna say, yeah, right, coach. They're gonna watch that film from Saturday against Sac State and say, okay, yes, I see what coach means. And you know, we always have to be about each and every opponent can be their very best, and that's going to be a lot for us to handle. So what do we got to do for ourselves to be our very best continually, and that's where, you know, the bar for this team, you know, has been set, and how do we take a step forward is probably the most important thing, again, regardless of who we play. But this is obviously going to be a big challenge based on what they're capable of.
Coach, you mentioned the passionate fans. A student here is so passionate. He's getting ready to walk 46 miles to follow through on a bet placed ahead of the Oregon game. Any advice to him before he sets out on that? And what do you enjoy the most coaching for such a diehard fan base? Well,
I'd say careful what you bet, for one. Sorry we didn't hold up our end on that deal, but appreciate him sticking to his word. Yeah, I think in the grand scheme of things in college football, the percentage of places that have a fan base like ours, you know, and it's on a relative scale, as far as, you know, our stadium only holds so much compared to the next place maybe, but you know, we're up there, and I don't take that piece lightly. I think to be able to go week in, week out into that stadium on a Saturday and feel it, not just see it, but you feel it. That doesn't happen all too many places, and we're very fortunate that we're one of them. And you know, I hope anybody that's in that stadium on Saturday says this is the best it's ever been. I think that's what we got to keep doing. Try to raise that best time we've ever been in Bobcat Stadium, and that's what we need on Saturday night. And we're looking forward to the opportunity.
All right.